What we're going to be doing here today is launching into the discussion about hydrogen transit across Canada. As many of you know, QTRIC's been trying to get a hydrogen bus project out the door with our partners in Mississauga for several years now. All the technology is done, all the calculations are done, all the partners have been at the table, and the only thing stopping it is the price of green hydrogen. So we're going to dive into that a little bit here today. But out west in my home province of Alberta and my past city of residence, Edmonton, we do have a couple hydrogen buses out the door on the road, so a lot of lessons learned there, and they are allied to the growing new energy landscape for the province of Alberta, which is also an exciting new development for the country. So with that, what I'm going to do is invite up to the panel our three speakers. We've got Eddie Robar, who's the branch manager for Fleet and Facility Services at Edmonton Transit, but I think that's an old title, Eddie, because I feel like you've been promoted recently, and I don't have your title right.
For City of Edmonton.
Okay, head honcho, City of Edmonton, we'll go with that, right? Okay, so, and then we have Jeff Marinoff, who's the Director of Transit in Mississauga, My Way. And we have Tash Chaudhuri, who is our lead social scientist at QTRIC, and you may have seen her at the ZEB database presentation. She's going to be joining us on the stage to walk us through some of the feasibility analysis that's motivated My Way's entry into the hydrogen landscape. So just to put things in perspective before we get going on the presentations, as many of you know, hydrogen fuel cell buses have taken off in the United States and in Europe. Europe, I think, is already into their second major joint procurement of hundreds of buses through the Jive network. California has taken off on zero-emissions buses, as Jennifer McNeil alluded to in her keynote earlier today. And we make a lot of this technology in Canada. And yet it's the perennial issue of why are there no fuel cell buses permanently on the road in Canada? Why is it that since the BC Whistler trial over 12 years ago that we haven't seen fuel cell buses on the road again? Why is it that so much Canadian IP and technology is on these powertrains and in these vehicles, and yet it's all exported and not adopted locally? So it seems like there should be an easy win here, and yet it's been fantastically difficult across the country, in part getting over the culture wars of hydrogen versus battery electric bus, and having gotten over that, now figuring out the whole, where are you going to get the green hydrogen in this country? And there's not that much of it, unfortunately, and it's not highly produced right now. So therein lies the big problematic ahead. And yet, as we'll hear from the speakers today, hydrogen fuel cell buses are giving us extensive range, a lot of performance opportunities, cross-seasonal capabilities, and in some cases, less infrastructure than their battery electric bus components. So there's a lot of positives there, still in the face of a lot of challenges. So with that, we're going to first start with our presentations and then turn to questions from the audience. There's a live mic in the middle of the room. And we're going to start first with Eddie Robar. And Eddie, I'm going to leave you to introduce yourself properly with your new swank title that I think is really exciting. And over to you, Eddie Robar from Edmonton Transit.
Thank you. I'm not sure it's a swank title. It's just branch manager of Fleet and Facility Services for the City of Edmonton. I was previously the branch manager of ETS for about 5 years, and previous to that I was in Halifax for about 14 years and ran the system there for about 6. So lots of transit experience in my background. I've been in transit for about 20 years and really focused on what greening fleets look like and making sure that we're doing the right things in the City of Edmonton to as well do that. I'm just going to move this a little bit so I can actually see my notes. There we go. Okay. Got to point this a certain way.
I think it's the lower button. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Is that right? Yeah?
Yep.
It's counterintuitive, but...
All right. So for those of you who don't know Edmonton, Edmonton is just over about 1 million people. We live on Treaty 6 territory. We have a footprint of about 684 square kilometers, surrounded by 6 other municipalities, bumping that population up to about 1.5 million. And the point being here is that we move a lot of people. So pre-pandemic, Edmonton Transit Service had a ridership of about 87 million per year, covering about 125,000 kilometers per day, or about 45 million kilometers per year. So that's roughly enough to make a trip around the moon and back over 58 times. So quite a lot of ground covered. And then also from our fleet, we have just under 1,000 buses, 60-foot articulated buses, 30-foot buses, and 40-foot buses as well. Just a little bit on the path that we've been on, why we see people in public transit and we're moving through, and the direct impact to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is our goal. The greenhouse gas emissions from production to combustion of fuels like diesel and natural gas have been linked to as much as 70% of Canada's contribution to climate change. We all know these stats. The stakes are high, especially in the Edmonton, where it's been identified as one of the fastest warming climates in the world, which, believe it or not, cold Edmonton is one of those places that, is identified. And we've had some pretty weird winters in the past 2 winters. Usually we get cold climates and everything is nice and freezing there. And the last couple of winters we actually had freezing rain. And they told me when I moved to Edmonton it doesn't rain in the wintertime. And that's been false for the last 2 winters. So, in fact, our city council and former city council kind of declared a climate emergency back in 2019 and released a strategic plan to kind of look at our path to climate resilience and really look at 4 priorities. And since then, in our 4 short years in Edmonton, we've opened a state-of-the-art LEED Silver transit garage in our Kathleen Anders Transit facility. Somebody spoke about earlier. We've led the country in the purchase of electric buses. We now have 60 of them in our fleet. We've released a comprehensive corporate plan that guides us to 2 million people by 2040, and the environmental impacts and being key pillars of that plan. What does that climate change and conversion look like? We've redesigned our bus network. We've secured funding for a zero emissions hydrogen transit project, which is our 2 hydrogen buses that we're piloting right now, and obviously the purchase of those hydrogen buses themselves. And then we've just recently released an RFI for a hydrogen fueling station for the city of Edmonton, and soon to be an RFP in January. Kind of the approach that we're taking in the city of Edmonton is really just, and this is the most exciting work that I get to do as part of my job, but this electrification program has evolved from 60 electric buses into this hydrogen work. And what it means for us is we're taking about a three-pronged approach. The first, I should flick the slide there. There you go. The first is the fueling station. Really, that's the catalyst for everything for us. With our hydrogen economy and how we want to build that economy in the plan, we really have to have a fueling station in place to understand, how much volume we can move in order to look at fleet conversions or buildings. We have to know how much volume of hydrogen we can move into our vehicles in order to kind of convert the fleet itself. So when we talk about what does our fleet conversion look like, which is number 2, it's really about looking at transitioning that fleet in conjunction with how much hydrogen we can actually get access to. Fortunately for us, we live in a region where hydrogen is a focus and is certainly something we have access to right now, but we'll have access to greener hydrogen as the years evolve. Our fleet conversion itself, we're looking at about just under 50% of our fleet in the next 4 to 6 years is coming of age. So we're looking to kind of convert those fleet either to battery electric or hydrogen electric. What that mix looks like is really contingent on us moving forward on building that hydrogen economy itself. And the last thing is our transit garage. And this transit garage we're looking to build is a little over $600 million facility, about 400 buses, but that'll be equipped with both battery electrification capability and hydrogen electrification capability. Probably more on the hydrogen side than the electric side for us as we start exploring what that means for us in that space. But the facility itself is what we call our swing garage. So we will take that facility. We have 5 facilities now. They're very full. So we're going to take the pressure off those facilities, move those diesels into the new facility, and then start the conversion process in that new facility. So we'll use that facility to convert our fleet. Then we'll build another garage after that in the plan, which is about 15 years away, and that facility will be fully electrified. So whether it'll be hydrogen electric or battery electric, there will be no diesel in that new facility. We'll move all the buses from our swing garage over to that facility and then start the process all over again. And just on the hydrogen fueling station itself, we RFP for that in the new year. That one is going to be, that facility itself, it's going to be at our southwest transit garage, our Centennial garage, and that'll be both privately accessible and publicly accessible. So we're going to have on one side of the fence an ability to fuel our transit buses. On the other side of the fence, we're looking to open that up to the public. and have them able to fuel and not have to buy the infrastructure or build the infrastructure to fuel their vehicles, and hopefully strive a bit of, or pump a little demand into the system itself. Some of the key considerations, how do we get there? Obviously, getting to that next level, the first step is engaging our city council. We have them on side right now on our plan and our approach, but while also looping in the provincial and federal governments. Big part of what we're doing right now is pulling this plan into one really good strategic approach, one program, so that we can shop that around. Obviously, it's expensive when you look at the cost of doing this work. We're into the $1.5+ billion for us to work through this whole program itself. So we need partners, funding partners, in order for us to do that. With our fueling station, we're looking at as much as we can to partner with somebody that's looking to build that fueling station for us. Like I think somebody else said it earlier today, that they're not in the business of wanting to be that person. We're not in that business of wanting to be the hydrogen distributor for the world. So we're looking for partners that can help us build that infrastructure, and same thing with our transit garage and our replacement strategy for our vehicles. We're looking for funding partners from the federal government, ZTIF, other opportunities that we have to partner up and try to make this cost as little as possible as we start working through that. And in early 2023, we'll be seeking that approval from our city council to actually give us the money for, in this budget, which is going on right now. So I kind of skip back in and out of budget, but we're acquiring the land for the transit garage in this budget, and then we'll be kind of we're applying for ZTIF funding for the facility itself. So we're looking for about $300 million from ZTIF to get approved and help us move forward on the transit garage. But we're confident that programmed approach is kind of what allows us to shop that concept around. So having a really good plan and a robust plan on the hydrogen side will help us move that conversation with the federal government and the provincial government, so that we can get funding for these pieces of work. And other considerations is obviously the physical environment. For us is a big consideration. Obviously, Edmonton isn't the most robust, utopic heat place in the world with a lot of sun and southern places. We've got lots of cold, lots of dark in the wintertime. So when we look at how we're looking at our strategy is built on blue hydrogen. Green hydrogen isn't really an option from the economic side of it for us. And we're also looking to produce a hydrogen economy in Alberta. We're probably uniquely positioned in the world to be a global distributor of blue hydrogen at a really good price. We have ready access to natural gas for the methane reforming process, and the blue hydrogen process allows us to capture our carbon as we start to kind of go through that process. So our goal is to make sure that we're going through that from a blue hydrogen point of view, and not necessarily a green hydrogen point of view, because we don't get a lot of sun in the winter for solar capture. We only have about 8:30 till about 4 for sun, and in the winter when it gets cold, there's no wind. So when it gets about -20 and below, there's not a lot of wind in Edmonton. So that's why we've chosen to go blue hydrogen, and obviously we're trying to position Alberta as a big player in the industry in terms of what does that mean for us to be a global producer of hydrogen in the region itself. So which is why we're not looking at in Edmonton as electrolyzers or on-site production of hydrogen. We want to be a purchaser of hydrogen and encourage that industry growth around the region itself. Yeah, and the last thing I would say is, like, for us, we're looking to kind of seize that opportunity. It is really been dubbed the hydrogen gold rush in this industry. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. This is our actual bus here from New Flyer. So it's a New Flyer FCEB. We're doing a range test on it through the weekend here when it's -20. So all the New Flyer folks are looking at me, but we're excited for what that can achieve. We've gone through the battery electric side of the world. We know what range looks like, the environment that we're in. We're excited about the opportunity that this bus provides for us moving forward, but we're also really excited about the opportunity that this is the catalyst for change for the city of Edmonton. We're looking to kind of change that narrative of oil country to a more sustainable fuel, and it starts with the buses. So it doesn't end here. Our program grows beyond this to buildings, to infrastructure, to other parts of the region, to kind of look at hydrogen as a blending fuel, as something that we can use on buildings, But it's all going to start with the bus side of it for us because it's our most opportune transition. When we look at the heavy-duty side of the GHGs and the bus opportunity that we have here with 50% of our fleet almost coming due in the next little while, we've got a great opportunity to look at that conversion and really drive the window on change for the hydrogen economy in Alberta. And like I said, it'll go beyond these buses themselves. But we're really excited about what this means for us and what it means for the future of transit in our region, and obviously what it means for our ability to kind of compete on a world stage in delivering hydrogen to the world too. So that's it for me. Thank you.
That was a great kickoff, and I think you ended it on exactly the problematic ahead, which is transit agencies are being expected now to have positions on the energy futures marketplace and to ultimately actually be energy marketplace players. That's something we're going to come back to in the discussion around blue hydrogen, the controversy, steam methane reform, the controversy. What do we do as transit when it's not all available? So with that, we're going to segue now over into Ontario with Joff Marinoff at My Way for us to walk us through the fuel cell bus agenda and goals at Mississauga Transit. Over to you, Joff.
Which button is it?
It's the downward one.
The down one.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Can I unplug this? Good afternoon. This is the desk slot right after lunch where everybody needs a nap, so I'll try and make this a little bit lighter. My staff did prepare me some notes, but what I'd rather do is tell some stories with pictures. And so I won't go through the notes, but what I'd like to do is just talk about our green hydrogen journey. And so I just turned to this slide here, which shows the greenhouse gas emissions profile for the city. And as you can see, transit is the biggest emitter for the corporation of the city of Mississauga. And when the city was developing its climate change action plan, transit was involved right from day one. And the story I want to tell really is like a lot of stories. It starts with a road trip. And so myself and the director of the environment, we took a road trip down to a small regional transit authority in Ohio, Stark County, and here's a small property in the States that had a visionary board, had some really good support from their state and federal government, and got into the hydrogen bus business ahead of everyone else. Had about a dozen buses and plans to basically convert their fleet in a normal life cycle fashion to completely hydrogen. And they were doing this back in a time before hydrogen even had colors. So, obviously it was black hydrogen, but we didn't know about that back then, but they were doing some really cool stuff. So all good road trips end, and we came back across the border and we started our journey to see if we could get some hydrogen buses going in Mississauga as part of our climate change action plan. And the first iteration was to take us as the city's largest emitter and partner with the city's largest emitter from the industrial perspective, which was a local cement plant. And, they do produce a lot of greenhouse gases. They also have access to industrial rate electricity. The intention was to, have an electrolyzer at the cement plant, and lo and behold, right adjacent to our main bus facility is a ready-mix plant. And we were going to put a fueling station at the ready-mix plant, fuel buses on one side of the fence, and fuel cement trucks on the other side. And cement trucks and transit buses have very similar duty cycles in the sense they all come back home at night so you can refuel them. And so this was our plan. It was all going gangbusters. And then cap and trade in the province of Ontario ended, which basically killed the business case, and we got back to zero because it just fell apart. So we continued to work the problem, engaged with Kutrick, and looked at how do we resurrect this project. Moving along, if we look at our facilities, everyone's tied by geography. We have about a 500 bus operation, 2 locations, 400 buses in 1 location, which is pretty big for a transit garage. But one of the challenges we have at that place is that after we did our electrification study, we were told by the local utility that frankly there's just not enough power in the neighborhood to support the electrification of that facility. And oh, by the way, unless a lot of your neighbors become energy hogs, they've got no plans of upgrading the local network. So if you want to electrify that facility, you're going to have to pay for some significant upgrades to the local electrical grid to feed that. So that's a big challenge for us. The second location is up at Malton, smaller, about 100 buses, but of course it has outdoor storage, but there was space for a fueling facility, whereas at the other location there wasn't. So our project ended up being up at Malton, and it's outdoor storage, which is something nobody's really done in the North American context in what I would call, moderately cold weather. It's probably not Edmonton scale, but certainly cooler than California. And so our project is really going to be based at that Malton location. And we currently running all diesels. We have a number of hybrids on order, which will help us in the short term. But based on our study, we can meet our 2040 targets, provided that we completely transition to zero-emission buses starting in 2028, which seems a long way away, but really isn't when you look at all the challenges of electrifying garages and things that other people have talked about. And moving on, why does green energy work for us? Well, there's a number of reasons. One is the energy infrastructure requirements. We have one location that's going to be extremely challenging to electrify, and really we don't have any easy answer for that today. The second is the service profile. Through Qtric, we modeled our fleet, looked at our blocks and routes, and essentially the current battery electric bus technology can do about 40% of them. Then things start to get a bit difficult. To do the rest of the requirements, you probably need about 1.3 buses electric versus one diesel. 30% more buses is a lot of buses to acquire and maintain, but also you have to build another bus garage, which are horribly expensive, particularly if they're electric. And so that's a real challenge for us. And then the fueling strategy, one of the problems with these battery electric buses, if you want to make them have longer range, you put in more batteries. That drives up cost. At present, it drives up weight, and it also drives up volume. And then the more energy you need to put in the bus, the longer it takes to charge it. So you get to that point where, even if the technology does get incrementally better, can you do that last 50%, 40%, or even 30% of those routes? So that's why hydrogen was really attractive. And then when we looked at the landscape around us, we've heard about Brampton and the good work they're doing there, York Region, TTC. If you go across the country, you can see that there's a lot of battery electric bus trials, so we were trying to do something that was a little bit different than what everyone else was. So our project was really simple. Let's buy 10 hydrogen fuel cell buses and put them into service using green fuel. So no gray, no black, no blue, just green. And phase one was the feasibility study, where we studied all our fleets, put together our requirements. We made an application to the ZTF. We got through the first screening. The second application's in for full funding. They've stopped asking questions, so that's an indicator that maybe we're getting close to award. Fingers crossed. I hope there is a Santa Claus. But ultimately with the project, it's very expensive to do green hydrogen because essentially you have to do an end-to-end fueling solution, and us as a municipality just couldn't do it. So when you can't do something, you need some friends. And so a partnership was created where we have Cummins Enbridge, who are what we are calling our fueling system partners. We have New Flyer and Ballard, who are going to be our bus partners. And one of the key things that they're providing in addition to the bus is the ongoing support of the hydrogen fuel component system. We don't have that expertise in-house. We know how to manage diesel buses, but hydrogen fuel cell at a small scale is a challenge, so that's a vital support that we need to keep this trial going. And then, of course, the city itself is providing funding. taking on some operational risk, and of course taking on some downstream risks when the pilot project ends and the money runs out. And then of course we've engaged Qtric to help us with pulling the project together, making the applications, advocacy, and then of course we're going to employ them to do all the data analytics that go with this project. And then this basically just talks about the fueling system. So, you know, we have an existing hydrolyzer out at the Markham Energy site at Enbridge. It was built to do grid regulation, and it could produce hydrogen, which could be used for transportation. So that was a local source of hydrogen, but of course, you now need to get it to the bus garage, so you need a transportation solution. So we worked on developing what that would look like. So basically compress it at the electrolyzer, put it into the tube trailer, drag the tube trailer to the bus depot. You need a bus dispensing, you know, for the fuel at the garage, and then of course you need the bus. And so you've got the production, you got the transportation, you got the dispensing, and then of course you got the consumption, an end-to-end fueling solution. And these are some of the benefits of hydrogen. You can see them there. They're pretty obvious. One of the key things about this project is it's scalable. We started with 10 buses. Obviously, the economics are really tough, but you know, even if you double it down, it gets expensive. And but you know, there are lots of benefits, but you got to start somewhere. And to some extent, this project's been suffering from what is known as the chicken and the egg, which comes first. Well, you need both. And our current challenges are availability and the source of green hydrogen. It's really limited and it's really expensive, particularly when you look at having to buy electricity at full market rates, which just makes it so much more difficult, particularly on Ontario. And you know, the production really depends on, you know, okay, can I do it in off-peak power? Is the demand high enough that you can get the industrial rates? There's a bunch of complexity that goes around with that electricity pricing. And you know, you need that end-to-end solution. And most transits really aren't set up to manage fuel. We know the bus business, we know how to put service out, we know how to fix buses, buy buses, plan service, but we really have never been in the energy piece. In other words, I have a contract, somebody delivers something to my doorstep, I need it, I use it, but I don't have to worry about anything that happens beyond the pump. And then to make this project happen, it's quite expensive, particularly at the scale, and you really need some help from your friends. And these are the friends at the provincial government and the federal government. And municipalities really at the bottom level of the tier of governments in the Canadian Federation have really limited capacity in terms of taxation, and we also have lots and lots of assets to maintain. And so the only way that this project can really happen is with some funding from the higher levels of government. We're hopeful that we'll have some federal government money that would help us, but you know, the partners are committing about a little over a third. We think we'll get pretty close to that from the federal government, but there's that missing third that's just not here, and we're really hoping that the provincial government will step up and turn this project from you know, a paper project into something that is real. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geoff. I had actually suppressed the memories of the part of the cement manufacturer narrative. I forgot that we had gone through that multiple years. How long have we been on this project? For 5 years. We'll get it out the door eventually. So with that, what we're going to do is bookend it with just a little bit of output. Geoff referred to some of the modeling work, and part of the discussion we're going to have here today is just how expensive is that green hydrogen given the volumes in the Canadian landscape. So given that price point, it's not a savings over electric buses. That story is not there, and that's why the Canada Infrastructure Bank can't finance this stuff. So it has to be about GHG savings. That's the only narrative right now from a business case. And so with that, we're going to turn to Tatash to walk us through that narrative for My Way, and then we're going to turn into a panel discussion.
Hello. All right. As some of you already know, I'm a social scientist, and I'm pretty sure my colleagues are The engineers and the physicists are watching me like a hawk virtually. So please forgive me if I say anything technical, mispronounce it, or say it incorrectly. I'm going to talk like a normal person, not a technical person. So here we go. So we're going to just share a little bit of the modeling work that we have done from the ZEPC side. And it helps with my understanding too, before we go into what we do. A hydrogen bus looks very simple. It is a bus that has a hydrogen tank. Oh, there you go. It has a hydrogen tank, and the hydrogen tank has hydrogen fuel in it, and it feeds into the battery that runs the bus. So with that simple thing, we use our Rootire tool to do our research and do our work and a modeling and simulation. We start with data collection, which is for GHG reduction and targets. Then we go into GIS. We look into route topography, route profile, traffic impediments, traffic speed. And there are a list of things that needs to be considered for the GIS analysis that feeds into the modeling work. We did the modeling work for My Way, where we considered 3 scenarios: heavy, medium, and light. From that, we do the energy modeling, then we do the success rate, and then total cost of ownership, how much will it cost you to own the emission LCA, and the risk assessment. This is just the feasibility and the phase 1 that Geoff mentioned. When we're talking about the whole implementation work, there is more elements attached to that. So in the GIS modeling work, there's a little bit of an example on how we are doing it. We are going from weekdays, holidays. We are collecting very detailed data. Followed by that, this is a slide that we're talking about the vehicle configuration. Since it's an anonymized presentation, we are considering 2 fuel cell buses with 2 bus sizes, considering 40 feet and 60 feet buses. And the vehicle's configuration displayed over here are anonymized. So the battery capacity is approximately 50 kilowatt for 40 feet, and then 100 plus kilowatt for 60 feet, then the fuel tank similarly. And the refueling time is also approximate vehicle specification consideration. And for this work, I will be showcasing some examples of vehicles with a diesel heater and one without a diesel heater. But at the same time, most of the examples showed here are without diesel heaters. With that, the first step of simulation is generating duty cycle. What do we mean by that? To accurately model these buses, what Qtrig does is they divide the whole scenario into light, medium, and heavy duty. So it's like the best case scenario, the average, and the worst case scenario. That means it's like packed with people, worst climate, and so on and so forth. And what happens with that is these are the simulations that we conduct. These are the operations pattern. The team does a speed profile, they do distance profile, elevation profile, and grade profile. And this results into the fuel efficiency. So the first, as you can see on the slide, the fuel efficiency is defined as the ratio of the fuel consumed for the operation of a particular block and the total distance traveled. So it's how much kilogram of hydrogen per 100 kilometers. So if you compare the 40 feet and the 60 feet, our study showed that for the weekdays, we have 6.93 kilogram of hydrogen per 100 kilometers, and then Saturday, it's kind of similar, the holidays. However, with the medium and heavy duty, we can see the consumption has increased significantly. Same with the 60 feet buses, it's definitely higher. And you can also see with the heat, with the diesel heater, the consumption is definitely lower compared to without the diesel heater. And one can ask why we're doing 2 of them, just to understand what the present current possibilities can look like with or without, and what can be the consumptions and the fuel efficiencies. With that, we're going to go ahead to explain with one of the scenario that is without a diesel heater. And what we understand is, Yeah. So what we understand is we're going to talk about the success rate of these buses, and when we talk about success rate, we consider again two scenarios. One is without any refueling, and then what happens if we add another refueling option. So the success rate is pretty good for 40 feet and 60 feet when it comes to light duty, the best case situation. But as Eddie mentioned and Geoff, like we are in a very cold climate environment and we have to consider the worst case. And as soon as we get there, we are seeing that you require another fueling. And if you go to the heavy, the worst case, in the winter times with like weekday travels, you notice that the percentage is 63, Saturday is 20%. So you need another fueling option here. So once you add another fueling option, for both 40 feet and 60 feet, we are almost reaching 100% of success in that. So across the board, we are having 100% success rate. So the hydrogen fuel consumption, this is basically some of the data which showcases how much kilogram of hydrogen you really need. And this is again without the diesel heater. I think I have a slide with the diesel heater too. But more or less the ballpoint numbers are mentioned. So the weekly consumption for 40 feet is 72,000 kilos. This is just with the diesel heater. Let's quickly talk about, how much time do you have? 2 minutes. Oh, of course, multitask. All right, so now we're talking about GSG. This is the biggest benefit for fuel cell electric buses. So as you can see in red for the diesel buses, we have a pretty large emission, and then as soon as you introduce the fuel cell, that is totally that is the biggest achievement here. Now we're going to talk about the total cost of ownership. That is also part of our work, and that shows that if you consider 12 years of service, the total cost of ownership, Q-Trick did a calculation for My Way for 10 buses for pilot and then full fleet 100 buses. And it's mostly the capital cost for vehicle and fueling, operational cost, fuel cost, maintenance, midlife reimbursement, and environmental costs that are considered. And there's a lot of conversation around operational cost that needs to be considered in government funding, which is not currently present, or it's part of the conversation. But Q-Trick does that study for you and gives you a number also that how much is that operational cost. So just a quick comparison, I don't have much time left, but as you can see, when it comes to the cost, we are not gaining anything out of it much. The cost of hydrogen is definitely very high still per kilogram. That has to first of all come down. Second of all is that diesel is still cheaper so the gain is mostly when it comes to GHG emission reduction. So this is the example of 60 feet. There is an additional cost of, I don't know if you can see it on the graph, there's an additional cost of acquisition cost, which is present when it comes to pilot to full fleet, so there's a slight increase over there. But with all, this is more or less our work in a very small gist, but if you have any further question, you can write to us. I'm pretty sure experts can talk about that.
Thank you so much, Sudesh. Good bird's eye view. That's the whirlwind tour. So the end message there is basically it's expensive, and it's more expensive than battery electric buses. So why go to hydrogen fuel cell? Two primary reasons: long range, so ease of deployment, and of course across that the seasonal component, and then the GHG reductions. And of course in Ontario, pulling hydrogen off an electrolyzer, off a green grid of nuclear and clean energy is a different story from pulling hydrogen off a grid in Alberta. So first questions, and you have microphones next to yourselves, I think. Tatash, you might have one there too, and we'll see if we've got the classic mic battery issue here, so we're going to see in a moment. First question to yourself, Eddie and Geoff, just starting on your end. Classic question we get is, since the hydrogen's so expensive, we'd already be out the door if we just accepted steam methane reformed hydrogen. It's $3 a kilo. Diesel's about $6, $7 a kilo. Green hydrogen's about $20 a kilo. So why not start with steam methane reformed hydrogen, get the buses out the door, and then convert the supply chain? So that's a common question we hear in the industry, and it's a difficult one to answer. So we'll first start with Joff on your end. What's the story there? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're going to swap out while we figure it out.
Okay. Frankly, it was political. My council, it was green, hydrogen, or nothing. We've already got diesel buses that are putting greenhouse gases into the air, and they weren't, frankly, interested in any solution that was just going to switch from diesel to natural gas, which was the source. Yeah, it might be less than it, but they were really looking for a zero emission solution.
Yeah, and I think we're hearing that across Canada. A lot of city councils saying, look, the steam methane reform's not on the agenda because we're looking to go green. Having said that, going ahead as Canadians, we may need to have a national dialogue about, if the supply chain's not there, what do we do? Do we sit on the diesel buses and wait it out? Or do we wait for the supply chain to grow? And over to you, Eddie, because as the supply chain grows, the federal government's invested billions in hydrogen hubs. They will come online in the next 2 to 3 years. Transit will be at the back of the line. Transit will not be the first in line. Those hubs are going to start supplying Stelco and the automotive industry and the large producers that require it. So there's a concern that even once those hubs are online, transit will be way at the back. In Alberta, the idea here is use methane that's already available, pump it into the ground to store the carbon that's produced from combusting it. Is this a midway solution that works? So over to you, Eddie, if you can walk us through that.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Are we good? Okay. Yeah, I think for us, it's what we can actually produce economically. I think in the region, obviously we've got ready access to natural gas in Alberta, and that kind of gives us the opportunity to kind of create now instead of waiting for global production of green hydrogen. So our advantage in what we're seeing as an advantage in Alberta is really the ability for us to convert now instead of waiting 10 years for true production of green hydrogen. So we have natural gas, like I said, readily available. For us, it offers us the opportunity to be a player in the industry as well. And, Alberta is super interested in being a global player and a global distributor of hydrogen itself. And for us to do that, it means showing and showcasing what that means and getting a price point on hydrogen that's affordable. And I think that what we're seeing now is we have to pay to play. So I keep saying we have to pay to play in the industry itself. It's going to be a bit expensive in the beginning, but our projections with new plants coming on board, new announcements with Air Products building a plant in Alberta, which is pretty exciting for us, allows us to get that cost of hydrogen down in the next 3 years and hopefully cheaper than diesel. So that's the plan for us, and really, blue hydrogen again is for us is in our environment. The economics just make more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So maybe let's walk through the economics just so folks are aware, if you're not deep into the industry, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eddie, but it's 2 pilot buses right now, one of which will last longer, and the total price tag, last time we checked, was about $10 million in total from the province and in total cost in. So if we do a high level back of the envelope, $10 million, 2 buses, $5 million for a bus, if you include the whole system to get out the door. Over in my way, it's about 30 to 40 million for 10 fuel cell buses for the long term. So they're not pilots, but it still breaks out to about 3 to 4 million per bus. It's not cheap by any means, and in comparison, a diesel or a hybrid, even battery electric, is considered to be about half that price. Whether that's true or not is another story from a facilities perspective. But that's what we're showing up to ministers with, and so that's a huge price point. Can you walk us through, maybe Joff, we'll start with you, just given the challenges we faced, without hydrogen strategies at the provincial level, there's a full stop to all of this because of these price points. What are some of the options ahead?
Well, one of the challenges we have is, we don't really have a battery electric bus solution. So at some point, we can electrify perhaps 70% of our fleet, but that last 30 is going to be either some sort of diesel hybrid, who knows what kind of fuel that will be, but it'll be a liquid fuel producing power on board, unless you can get hydrogen to work. And so, if we want true zero emissions, we need to find something to close that last gap, because buying 30% more buses and 30% more bus garages, plus all the moving the buses around and non-revenue service for charging, is going to have some real costs. And one of the problems with hydrogen today is the economies of scale. There isn't any. But as those economies come together, you'd expect that price to come down. And if we, cost the full impact of fossil fuels, which we don't do today, we're starting, and that's very painful. But if we were to look at that, does that level the playing field? And so somewhere those two curves are going to have to cross over. But today, it's the prices are eye-watering.
Yeah, and Eddie, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think for us, it's the prices are certainly expensive. We've kind of cut our teeth on the battery electric side of the world too, but we're also focused on the GHG impact as well. And obviously Alberta produces power in a dirty grid, which doesn't help us when we look at kind of electrification and what does that mean more globally in the full carbon accounting of the work itself. So when we look at the option on hydrogen, it offers us an opportunity to capture the carbon, which is a bit better than what we're doing with the electric buses right now. So that part of the world is that pay-to-play space. Our hope is that we're getting that cost of hydrogen down by becoming a player in the industry. So if we can become a global player distributor in Edmonton, in Alberta, that proximity is obviously great for us. But it's also great for Canada too, in terms of producing a sustainable fuel at a price that can be competitive across the industry. So.
Yeah, that really helps us set the context. And we do have a live mic, so we have time for 2 questions from the audience if there are questions. And just while we wait for the juices to flow, one aspect about that is if we look at the Enbridge Cummins facility, it's the only place really in Ontario right now producing green hydrogen, and it's making about 1,000 kilograms a day in Markham. Well, to eat up 1,000 kilograms a day, which is low volume, it's about 30 buses. Like, it's not astronomical number of buses. One GO train would eat that up in a day. So about 1,000 kilograms a day, 30 buses, and according to Enbridge and Cummins, the price point would come down after 20. If we look at the Canadian landscape, and I'd like to know your insight here, Eddie, really just purely not being an Albertan or an Ontarian, though I'm both, the natural marketplace is the GTHA for this, just because of the intensity of the marketplace. If you added up Brampton in York Region, TTC, and My Way, you'd get to thousands of kilograms overnight with everybody doing a 5 to 10 bus pilot. Theoretically, that works, but it's the chicken and egg that Enbridge and Cummins have flagged. Until the buses are there, they won't build the electrolyzer. Till the electrolyzer's there, the agencies won't buy the buses. So we're all stuck in a quagmire. Alberta's come out first saying, we're going to invest in this space, but as I understand, your supply chain isn't guaranteed either. So can you walk us through what is the province doing to help you? And then, Joff, I'm going to ask you, what does the province need to do to help you?
Yeah, I think for us, we've taken the risk, I guess. So, we've jumped into the hydrogen sphere without having, a planned path and approach to the infrastructure that needs to support it. We're working on the infrastructure side of it right now, and our intent is to get the support that we want from the province and from the feds that we require to kind of make this path a real path. And we've got real buses now. We have to fuel them after we're done. Right now, we're fueling our vehicle at Suncor, the Suncor refinery. Right now, and our intent is to not do that long term. Obviously, it's a bit cumbersome for us to do that, but we want to get the information that we can in the interim. So right now, the province has done nothing. However, they've come out pretty hard on hydrogen in Alberta and supportive on that file. And Edmonton has never really come together with the province much, but this is one that I think we can get some congruence on. So we're excited about what we're doing in January. We're heading to lobby a bit on the provincial side of the fence and have conversations with the province around supporting this agenda for us with a really programmed approach, with that 3-pronged approach that we have there, but obviously kind of growing the scope of that over time. But we're confident that there'll be a player in the space with us kind of moving forward. So we're excited about that opportunity because right now it looks like that alignment is there. But we'll test that theory in the new year.
If it's going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen in Alberta, in part because if you look at ministries of energy across the country, they're tiny except in Alberta. The Ministry of Energy is massive in terms of the employment, so there's a lot of people who are energy experts. We should hope that we could come up with a solution. Now, over to Ontario, where we could be energy players, we have a huge green grid, we have the capacity, but the strategy doesn't have money. So, Joff, what does the province need to do?
Well, when I talk to my started my presentation, I talked about that road trip down south, and here was a small transit organization with the help of the state and the federal government that got that critical mass, and they're self-sustaining. They've got a path forward, but they got that support to get things started. And those first 10 buses are going to be painful, but once the fueling infrastructure is up and running, adding another 10 becomes so much more easier. And at some point, you just got to start because, again, chicken and egg, you got to start somewhere. And a municipality can't do it on its own. The partners are stepping up to the plate, but if we want to create capacity, we need both levels of government to be on the same page at the same time to make this a reality.
Yeah, and I mean, to put it in context, this province just ended the fiscal year with a surplus, slight surplus over loss, so it's not like we're running a deficit in Ontario either. There's money to be had, and so if you were here at the opening, Minister Stan Cho said he loves what Kutrick does, and we're about to go lobby the heck out of him for this project because the province has the money. It's about matching it to the objectives. And so just to conclude, Tatash, you run the ZEB database. We have seen Halifax say maybe, TransLink is thinking maybe, and then it's Winnipeg, Edmonton, and Mississauga, and that is it. Outside of Brampton, which recently made a little announcement on potential hydrogen buses. Like, that's the marketplace in Canada. Are you seeing anything else come out in the survey about hydrogen from transit?
I think I recently...
Oh.
I think as part of the whole conversation, I recently spoke to a few. I think the provincial strategy is quite important. I think BC Transit, and they are talking about their provincial strategy. It's a larger picture. And we had the first conversation with Dr. McDonald, who was talking about that how it's an ecosystem that needs to be taken care of first, and the transit agency is a very small portion of it. And hydrogen fueling is such a scenario, like even when I was talking to BC, they were talking about the fact that it is coming, but it's the strategizing provincially, the fueling system, how it's going to develop.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and one of the benefits, of course, being TransLink or BC Transit is your boss is the minister. So you have a provincial in right at the cabinet table, something that the rest of the agencies don't have. So on that note, we're staying positive. We keep fighting the good fight. We have a lot of provincial strategies on hydrogen in this country. Most of them are empty right now, but it just takes a lot of chorus voices to make sure that there's money in those strategies to get these projects out the door. So congratulations to both Edmonton and to Mississauga for keeping with it and breaking the ice around hydrogen bus deployment in the country. Next year, we will have Aaron Cook and the team at Winnipeg Transit back out here because they'll be the first out the door with significant fleet deployments. So with that, final comments. Eddie, we'll go to you for final recommendations and comments to the industry on this.
No, anybody that wants to give us money, we're open for business. So we're looking for as much free cash as we can get. So.
Anybody price copying? Okay, well, we'll talk to Shell and Petro-Canada for you on that behalf.
Yeah, one of the things is that when we try to get help from the higher levels of government is, you need an ecosystem. And, hydrogen, that's energy. Buses, that's transport. Innovation, that's another ministry. And they all have their little programs, but they're not well connected, not well coordinated. And to be honest, if I have a bus without the energy solution, I have nothing. If I have the energy solution without a bus, I have nothing. And we really need an end-to-end ecosystem. And the programs we have to support, innovation, job creation, and, get Canadian technology in use in Canada really aren't set up to deal with what I would call as an ecosystem. And that's a critical weakness because everything's very siloed, and that's both at the provincial level and at the federal level, and that's just why this has become so difficult and so time-consuming.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, not to just go on the money harping, but that's the problem, that the challenges that we've had to date is really no different than the electric bus deployment. It's not about the bus. The bus is just the easiest part of the whole thing. It's about the regulatory environment. It's about your buildings. It's about setting up your infrastructure in place and making sure that you have a proper ecosystem around that vehicle itself. So the buses we can get, and we got them easily. Getting them into a building, an old building or an older building, is the challenge through the whole piece of the work that we've had. So
You guys have ended on a fantastic segue because we've said it here before. We have 20th century government organization for 21st century problems. And right between ministries of energy, ministries of transport, and ministries of economic development and innovation is the solution. And yet we have ministries divided on mandates from 100 years ago. So if we can overhaul that, then we may be here in 6 months' time looking at your electric or your fuel cell buses, transporting us, Joff, over to the hotel and back. And hopefully in the future, and I know that Edmonton is hosting the CUDA conference coming up, so an opportunity to showcase the technology out in Edmonton. So I want to thank you all, and thank you again for the research, Tatash, that you shared with us. Thanks to Joff and to yourself, Eddie, for, again, breaking that ice on the fuel cell sector. Thank you, everyone.